Hello traders, welcome to a recap of my Emini S&P 500 ES futures trading for the week of June the 20th to the 24th. And definitely a very interesting week because the Brexit was the big news, the vote happening on the Thursday, after the US morning with the markets. And that was definitely very impactful on the markets for the week. It was something that we saw being a very hit or miss week, essentially, where I had a couple days that were exceptional, led to a really exceptional result overall. Really happy with that. That's the best result I've had since I started doing these weekly recaps. But there really wasn't much available on Tuesday. There actually wasn't all that much available on Thursday either, but I was playing it safe on Thursday because the vote was coming later in the day and didn't really expect too much. Watched the market, wanted to see if maybe there was some volatility there just because the uncertainty evolved. But I think a lot of the major players just kind of standing aside, and there just wasn't all that much movement. And so, in those sort of conditions, I have no real reason to try to force anything and try and trade. I'd rather play it safe. But then when things were moving well, as we're going to see in some of the charts on Wednesday, Friday, I got more aggressive. I took some bigger trades and held for some bigger wins as well. As you can see, Monday I didn't trade, relaxation day, just taking the day off as usual. In hindsight, knowing that I probably wasn't going to trade on Thursday, I maybe should have traded Monday, and it actually would have been a pretty good day. There was a good number of points available. Would have been maybe not 10 or 15 points, but something close to it. But I think this next week I probably will trade on Monday just because of the volatility, the volume in that's brought into the market from this Brexit vote. Should make things really quite interesting. So starting things off on Tuesday here, I actually didn't put together a recap video this day because I just didn't get a chance to do it. And so here's the 4 trades that I had. Not a lot to show for it, as mentioned before. And I had a couple wins, had a couple losses. Kept the loss. One of these losses pretty small, one a little bit bigger. You can see here in this kind of big picture that we had actually had a pretty strong drop down. Even right here around that open, might have been a worthwhile short, and then again, hindsight, might have actually wanted to take that one. A little bit of a non-STA trade coming back into a level here, maybe kind of a deep level pullback situation, but it was would have been a fairly aggressive one for sure around that open with the way we were getting some higher lows in here. And once we push down, though, I would be looking if we could find a good situation for some shorts. We just really didn't find a great, high momentum situation here to trade, and so there wasn't anything clear cut enough, with the way that things have been chopping in here for me to really go for it. We had an interesting sort of trendline reaction here, breaking through this prior trend line to the downside with some really good momentum to the upside. So I figured that was worth a shot. You can see here I took 2 attempts to the upside and basically just lost a tick, a quarter of a point on those. But this one here was worthwhile trade coming off that break. Just didn't follow through, so took the profit off the table because I knew I was going against the flows here, right? Going against mostly selling. So if we can't find that buying stepping in, if we can't find that aggressive move to the upside, which is what I'm looking for on that type of momentum, I'm looking for that type of momentum to step in again, essentially push me up into this area really quickly. And if that's not happening, then odds are pretty good we're going to come right back down. So if you can't make that move in the one direction going against the flows, probably going to come back the other way. And so, I tried one short here, which I knew could be a little complicated. Again, barely heading into a fresh low. And then because we broke to the upside like this, especially after kind of trapping some traders short, having this failure here, there's a much better chance that you are actually going to break to the upside. So took a bigger loss on this one, but usually a worthwhile risk, so I don't really have a problem there. So basically just didn't have much to show for it early, and then we finally did break and broke pretty aggressively, and finally broke out of this really ugly structure as well and had a really nice trade here that could be taken up into that next area before we started to kind of chop around in there and things started to get a little bit more dangerous, particularly considering the type of day that we'd had. So, not too much in there, but still a decent result. But things started to open up quite a bit more on Wednesday, where we saw some bigger swings, much better market movement, and that's, what I'm definitely interested in terms of being able to take some bigger profits, some bigger targets. So you can see here, I tried this first one kind of as we were still a little bit stuck in this area, but looking for a breakthrough prior to the news. But because it wasn't happening, similar to that last trade I was talking about for yesterday, gave it a couple attempts, it wasn't happening. I was happy to take the profit there, plus with the news coming up. So it's I don't want to just get in that habit of taking a small profit on the table just because I'm afraid that price might come back, that I might take a loss. That's where you run into trouble when you start making those emotional trading decisions. But if you're doing it based on having given the market time to make its break, you give it a couple attempts, it can't go, and then you take the profit off the table, it doesn't always maximize every trade. As you can see here, I could have had that extra point that I was initially targeting, but in the long run, you can usually find an increased edge there, an increased expectancy there if you're making those trading decisions off those objective reasons and thinking in terms of larger samples of trades. So if you do that decision, you make that decision, take this profit off the table, 20, 30 times in similar situations to this, it's usually going to work out in your favor from an expectancy standpoint. So that's why I do that sort of thing. But, I'm usually trying to aim for a bit more if I can. This was one here that because we were breaking out of this zone, it had some potential even to run up to this next one, which it eventually did. You can see I got taken out here. I actually had a stop. I was kind of trailing behind this consolidation, got taken out, and then it took off. So max I would have had there would have been 5 points anyways. That's basically what I aim for as a max, but still pretty happy there. Got a good short here as well once things broke off that area and kind of came back into a little bit of a zone that could be traded off of here, but no follow through there. That's always going to be a little bit riskier going against the flows here, but it's coming into an area where we know some sellers can step in. So I'm willing to take that attempt, just like I'd be willing on this second push down here. So didn't go on the first time, but it did go on the second. And when it did, I latched on here. Took a couple points because unfortunately we didn't get an earlier pullback. An earlier pullback in here would have meant I could aim for 3, 4, or 5 points. But I did take a little trade here, which was a little bit aggressive, but because this move was so strong and coming off of a pretty clear area that in the past had brought in some pretty major supply into the market, some strong sellers, I wanted to kind of latch onto this again within this flag pattern that we had here to look for a break at this area, knowing as well that if we could break this area, we were probably going to run down into at least these lows in here and maybe even beyond, because we had been lower in that pre-market. So it was an opportunity to just trail a stop down behind these consolidations, which is all I did here, and ended up getting my full 5 points, which is again my max target I usually go for. And then I just called it a day, and just a couple, 2.5 hours, but 10-point day, which is fantastic. Could have actually had a bit more if I had taken a couple other shorts in here, but not too worried about that. Again, don't try to be greedy with it. That's why I take the 5 points when it's available. That's why I often just call it a day. If I've got a good number of points in the bank, I rarely trade much more than a couple hours, 2.5 hours most days. And the last one here, because I mentioned I skipped Thursday. Well, I did watch the markets and we did do some live training and stuff, but was just being very cautious. Didn't really want to trade, knowing that that vote was upcoming, knowing what a big deal it was for the market. And so didn't have anything there because of that cautious approach. But then because the vote was maybe a little bit of a surprise to analysts for sure, the market reacted pretty aggressively in the overnight, pre-market, and we started things off with some major swings to the upside. So the market open was just over here, but we just had a big push up and then kind of continued that. So you can see I started a little bit later on this day, as I often do on Friday, but just kind of waited for that trend to the upside to reestablish itself, and where I was able to trade off of areas that could bring in some order flow in my favor, and caught a really nice 3.5 here. And notice that basically all of my profit targets are a little bit bigger. I had, I was aiming for 5 points basically right off the bat, with the exception of pretty much this one short trade here because it was coming into a major trend line. Everything else I was aiming for 5 points, including the short here once we had the structural break on that trend line. And that was just because in this sort of environment, when this volatility is through the roof like this, you usually want to adapt by opening up those targets a bit, aiming for a little bit more, because that's what the market's going to offer. And you kind of have to balance out that if you take losses, you're probably going to take full losses in most cases, because the market is moving so aggressively. It's just going to come out and take your stop right away. It's going to snap back. And a lot of times when markets get like this, I might only win half my trades, but the average win is so much bigger than the average loss because I'm opening up those targets, that the edge is still very strong. Now this turned out to be a really good day, 15 points, which is fantastic, but largely because I had a pretty high win rate here. So that would be a little bit unusual for this type of day, but had things opened up, if I couldn't get that 5 points, I was taking what's available. Sometimes getting taken out by stops, like in this case where I kind of hit a stop behind this area here, hoping that that would react if it pulled back. But then had some that I was just able to trail that down. And then this one here, again, looking for 5 points, but just taking the profit that was available if the market started to slow. So, I'm aiming for more based on what the market's doing, but I'm willing to adapt to the market conditions as well. You don't want to just have it in your head that I'm only going to take 5 points and, market's giving you all sorts of clues that it's not going to do that. It's not going to do that run. And then you come back to taking break even for, that happens all the time for newer traders. And it's just, it's a total assault on profitability essentially, because you miss out on so much not taking that good, solid, available profit off the table. So it's always a little bit of a balancing act in these more volatile days. But if you can be adaptable, you can let things run a little bit and lock in some of those profits, you can have some really, really big days. So this is an exciting one because not only was this a good day, but it certainly opens up some potential for next week. So next week, I'm probably going to trade a little bit more, as I mentioned, and hoping that we continue to have some good volume and volatility, because this sort of environment can lead to some really extreme profits. So hope you guys had a great week as well. Really look forward to next week, and so hope you have a good one for next week as well. And I will talk to you guys in the next recap.